Okay, so for those of you listening, thanks for checking out this track. I'm going to go ahead and provide you guys with a quick breakdown of the principles and methods that I used in order to make the track. So without further ado, I'll try to make this as brief as I can. I apologize if the audio quality isn't as great as it could be, but I'm, working with some constraints here. So let's just go ahead and get into it. I'm going to go ahead and get in Ableton here. 1 second. Okay, so we're here in Ableton. The first thing that I did for the track was I went ahead and listened through the sample pack that Loopop provided. It was honestly a really great sample pack. I'm very happy I had the opportunity to download it and make this track. Let's see here. So what ended up happening is I listened through the samples and I was listening to them and looking for kind of what style of track I wanted to make based off of the audio information that I was given with the samples. And there were a lot of lush pads, tons of really cool electronic drum sounds. So I thought what would be a great track to make would be, I guess it's maybe hard to explain without just mentioning some groups, but like a drill and bass glitch style track. So something in the vein of like Aphex Twin, Ottacur, Square Pusher, Venetian snares, something like that. So, with that in mind, I went ahead and got started. You can see right here, I have it up at 160, which is very typical, of their kinds of tracks. They're usually around there or faster. And then once I had the tempo set, I just kind of went to work. The track, much like many of those kinds of tracks, changes rhythm, changes melodic structure many times. One thing that I wasn't really able to do because of time constraints, but also because of the size of the sample pack, was really, kind of get into completely changing the sounds throughout the track. So it does tend to follow very similar sounds throughout the entire track, which is, I wouldn't say very typical of that style of music. I feel like a lot of times, especially with like Aphex Twin tracks, by the time you get to the end, you're kind of in a different place completely than you were at the beginning. So it's still kind of following that idea, but keeping those same timbres and those same sounds more or less in place. So with this style of music, I guess there's some kind of mystery surrounding it. I suppose, people are always kind of wanting to try to figure out how to make this style of music. And, from listening to that style, the most that I've gleaned from it is it really just comes down to careful editing. A lot of their seminal material, the artists that make this style of music, was made in trackers, and with trackers you really have to think about each loop or each phrase that you put in a song, because the first thing you do when you start learning how to use a tracker is you build a loop, and then you have to figure out what to do with that loop next. Inside of Ableton, it's very easy to draw up some MIDI notes, stretch them out like this across the sound canvas, and then get busy with making variations of those. So I really did try to take that into account. They do use obviously a lot of DSP as well, which I used in this track. But for the most part, I really feel like their sound comes down to a lot of just very careful editing and taking it one phrase at a time. And kind of, I know for sure, like Richard D. James, for instance, he will typically, I think he received a lot of inspiration from kind of the 20th century minimalist composers like Philip Glass and John Cage, people like that. And so they have this idea of, building a progressive melodic structure off of an idea, just adding one little piece here and there to maybe each phrase or maybe after a couple of bars, and then creating very complex melodies and complex song structures from a seemingly basic and simple idea at first. And I see that a lot in this style of music as well. So you can kind of see if I zoom in here. Let me see if I can just draw this out a little bit. You can see with my rhythm sections and stuff, I have a lot kind of going on. This is where the hi-hats and the snares are. And you can see there's a lot of difference in rhythmic structure. I've got tons of fills going on. And then the samples from this, I mean, I basically went through most of the percussion packs and really tried to utilize all of the sounds. Maybe not all of them, but you can see here I've got, you know, a pretty hefty little sample pack here of about, looks like 16 different sounds between hi-hats and snares, and then several more right here. So I'm trying to utilize it as much as I can. Then if I go up here to my kick section, same story. You know, you don't typically have 13 different kicks slash weird noises in the mix to come up with the bass section for your tracks. But, you know, again, kind of going back to the idea before of taking something simple and then building something complex out of it just by adding to it, and then maybe taking one element away and then adding another. You can start to build really complex things. And one thing that you're going to need for that is a lot of different sounds, a lot of different drum sounds and kick sounds. And I think that's kind of where a lot of the essence of some of these sounds might come from, is it's really just a variance of samples that are being used, again, because it's being made inside of a tracker. And so, you know, for instance, I have this section right here, which was, here, let me find it one second. This one right here. I took a bunch of sounds from the, let me find it one moment. Let's go to sample packs and then have the Loopop one right here. And then I believe it was the Perkins. Yep, the Perkins HD1. I just took a bunch of different hi-hat samples and then put them together. But you can see I'm using all different kinds of hi-hats. I'm not just doing a 16th across like you would often do sometimes. I'm using a bunch of different samples. And what that does is just create a variance of pattern that will essentially kind of sound like a modular. And here I'm going to play this just to show you what I'm talking about. So that honestly, to me, sounds like something that I would have made on a modular synth, you know, with filter modulation and different things like that, maybe a noise source. But anyway, so, you know, you take on that idea and then you can see I clearly built through that here, and then I kept adding more and more to it as it went along, and that kind of creates a more advanced pattern. And so, you know, with a lot of great variants and fills and different things like that, you can create seemingly complex, what seems like glitched out patterns. And so another thing that I did, which, you know, kind of harkens back to this idea of the DSP processing that they engaged in a lot and still do, obviously, with their tracks, is I used the buffer shuffler plugin to manipulate and restructure the rhythms to make them sound like more like weird glitchy signals. And then I added these on top of the pre-existing rhythms that I was making. They were just, you know, hard programmed in here. And then it created essentially like little glitch fills on top of it. So let me go ahead and highlight these two tracks right here. And then we'll listen to that real quick. Okay, so you can see, and then I'll just go ahead and you know, oh, I'm going to solo this so you can just hear the little glitch effects in there. Okay, and then all together. And then I actually recorded some audio of it. So you get the idea. And I wanted to highlight one other thing about the rhythm here. I talked about this variance in kick drums that I used. And so I'll just play that for you. And you can see basically what I did. You can see with this pattern right here, I have probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 different kinds of kicks / strange noises that are playing together here. And I also layered some other kicks on top of it. And so I'm just going to highlight that real quick. And so you can hear that. So you're getting this pattern, and it's not just a kick and it's not just a bass line. It's kind of like I just took the samples and then combined them together to create kind of like this weird, what again seems like something that would come out of a modular synth, kind of strange kick / bass pattern. It feels to me at least like there's something going on there more than just samples being used. But that's kind of, when you use these tricks by combining a ton of different samples together / changing the rhythms, you can kind of get these textures that appear and then kind of fools your ears, so to speak. So that's kind of the basis of the rhythm section. In terms of other DSP, I definitely did. Oh, I don't know why that's doing that. Hold on just a sec here. Okay, cool. Now we're actually where I wanted to be. So this is, obviously the clip launch, and then you can see the mixer section of the drums here. I actually had this is something that I like to do with my drums a lot, to again create movement and to create variance in the signal pattern in both rhythm and later in synths I'll show you similar things. But it's, I have a delay, I have 2 different reverbs, and I have a chorus that are set up as sends to this particular drum rack. And you can see right here I'm running different sounds, not a ton, but I'm running some different sounds through the chorus and through the delay and the reverb. And I do that again to create variance in the pattern. And it's a little more subtle. Like for instance, you can take 16th hi-hats, which I did here, and you can use the chorus. And you're not going to do it super heavy, obviously, but you can use the chorus, and that chorus effect on top of the hi-hats will kind of create this movement. And you may not fully hear it in your ears, but you will subconsciously at least pick up on that. So that's another way that I create movement and rhythm and create like a changing sound with static samples, essentially. So that's pretty much the rhythm section. When we get into what I used for the the melody and harmony of the project, I used some of the textures. I used a couple of textures from Heimbach. At least that's what I think was in the sample pack. I think he created the textures. Correct me if I'm wrong. But anyway, I found this texture, which I think I dropped the pitch of, and then kind of manipulated a little bit, and I really manipulated it, which I'll show you a little bit later. So a couple of those textures, and then I'll get into like my effects change, which were very similar with most of the track. But here's another texture here. Let me solo this. So just a little interesting textures to add variance to the sound. Again, we're trying to create movement. We're trying to create a change. These kinds of tracks, they're constantly changing and they're constantly progressing to something different. And so we need to essentially arrange the track that way. And, the best thing that you can do whenever you're making music in general, or with this kind of music, if it doesn't sound right, quit trying to make it work. Figure something else out that actually fits really well with the sound. And that's kind of what I did. I started with this really awesome pad that I found in the sample pack, and I'll bring that up. This is the Hydrasynth, which is a really awesome hardware synth. I've played before, don't have one, I'd like to get one, but anyway, I created these pads here with that, and then essentially built the rest of the harmony around it. But What I did as well is I tried to make, I didn't just stick to one loop that repeated. I didn't just stick to the same notes that repeated over and over again. I added some variants. You can kind of see little notes that were added here and there, and each little note that gets added creates a different timbre, potentially creates a different chord or chord inversion of a previous chord. So it's really just taking these simplistic ideas and then building and building and building on them until you have something that is complex and that is the sound that you're looking for, essentially. So I used the Hydra synth. I did use several presets from the Waldorf M that I found in the sample pack. The processing for the synth sounds was largely similar. And I do apologize, if anyone tries to pick up this project file. I didn't use Ableton plugins because I don't normally go to their stock plugins because I have, the Slate bundle, for instance, and different things like that. So I use those. Those are my go-tos. I almost use them subconsciously without thinking about them. But you can see here, I've got the decent sampler, which works very well. Was very happy about that. I've got a filter here, and I do this a lot. You don't see it here as much, but I use this filter a lot. And then because it has two filters in it, and you can set one to be a high pass, band pass, low pass, and then you can set the other one to do the same. So I usually set one to high pass and one to low pass. I kind of do some EQing through filtering essentially. And, it's basically an adjustable width bandpass filter at that point. So I do a lot of filtering to get the sounds where I want them. And then I also use, here I'm using, looks like Supermassive from Valhalla. And then I've got some EQ. It's heading into a compressor, which is really just side chaining the kick so that the kick's going to come through. And again, give a little bit of movement to those pads. And then I'm just running into the virtual mix rack here, which is a great program or a great software suite that Slate provides. And really with that, it's just simple, channel. So emulating some hardware there, a little EQ, a little compression. These are really just for the meters, maybe adding some kind of digital analog warmth there. But really a lot of the pads were just very similar. Some of them maybe have a little more reverb in them. And, you could also repeat all of these processes with stock Ableton plugins. With this particular track, the importance is really not in the specific effects that I'm using, or maybe even the specific effects chains. They can be reproduced with stock Ableton plugins. It's really about the choices that I'm making as far as the samples that I'm using. And, again, creating that variance, because that's what you want from these tracks. You want something fast. You want something that's going to have a lot of variance. And you want something that is going to come out sounding kind of tricking your ear, like what's happening with this rhythm section or these pads. Like, why is this melody still keeping me interested after 2 minutes or whatever it is? So anyway, I would like to go over a couple more things here real quick. I hope I'm not being too long-winded, but anyway, so this is another sound. This was a choir sound from the Waldorf M. And you can see my effects chain is very similar here. One of the things that I wanted to point out in here is this is another way that I'm adding texture to the track is I have the Blank Forms tape rack, which simulates a lot of that analog cassette noise. And I'm going to go ahead and hit solo here so you can hear this. I don't know if that's fully coming through there. Yeah, you can kind of hear it in the background now. But I have this varying in volume throughout this particular track here, and this plugin makes this noise and it just kind of goes. It's like the Echo plugin that Ableton came out with. And what this does is it provides a subtle amount of texture underneath the track whenever these choir pads aren't actively playing. And I'll play these choir pads for you. So it's adding texture when they're playing, and then when it's not playing, there's just like this subtle noise under the track, which if you listen to a lot of electronic music, is a very standard practice in getting some interesting texture, right? So I did that, and then really I did try to stick to in the box, and I really did try to focus on, not manipulating the samples too much. And I feel like I did a pretty good job with that on this track. I did go pretty hard on processing with a couple of sounds. Um, obviously in particular the glitch effects that I spoke about earlier, and then also this particular thing here, this little track right here, which I took this sample from the Heinbach sound, the little spy tape recorder thing that they recorded textures on, and I dropped that into my Phonogene module, which is on my modular. You can kind of see it right here. But I just tried to use it as an effects processor. Again, I tried to read through the notes of the contest, and I know that we're not supposed to be using external instruments, and so I tried to keep it like not as an instrument, but more of an effects processor. So I really just sampled into it. I didn't, get granular or splice things up real crazy. I just basically created a loop with it, pitched it down, and then added some envelopes to it to get some percussion out of the texture, and ended up with something that sounds like this. So let me go here. And if you listen to the track, you would have already heard this in there, but so you can hear that. It's just a loop. And then, I do some things through the processing to try to get some variance out of it again, because that's what we're doing with all our sounds. So now we've got a different loop here. And then I ran that also through the buffer shuffler. And I'll go back to that in just a sec, but these little sound clips in here, let me zoom in on them, where it splits up. Those are the instances that are run through the buffer shuffler, and it's again just creating variance. Okay, so I think we've heard enough of that. Okay, and then the buffer shuffler, for those of you that don't know, let me find it real quick. This was kind of one of the main processors that I used to get glitch effects. You can really trick stuff out with it pretty hard. Come up with completely different sounds, and it kind of sounds granular and gritty and stuttering, and that's basically what I was using it for, was to get complex stuttering effects that would sit on top of the pre-programmed rhythms, give them a little more of an organic feel, and again keep your ears guessing what's on. I think this is available with Ableton. I think you can get it on the Ableton website if you've got Max for Live. If not, I did pick it up on another website. I can't remember the name of it, but it's one of the main places that you go to get Max for Live plugins. Name escapes me again at the moment, but anyway, that was pretty much the process that I went through to make the tracks. I didn't use any external instruments, obviously, and these were all samples from the sample pack. If anybody has any further questions, hit me up in the comment section or anything like that. But yeah, y'all have a good evening. Thanks. Peace.